Among the internet film critic community, one term that I see getting tossed around quite often lately is the term cinematic failure, or some variation of the term like cinematic disaster or conceptual failure. I had recently posted a tweet jokingly stating why I dislike the use of the term, and I thought nothing of it until I woke up the next morning to find over 50 replies demanding that I explain myself. So, here we are. Now, my main gripe with the use of this term centers around a few core principles: the vagueness of the term when it comes to language and definition, the misuse of the term, and the overuse of the term. Let's start with the most provable aspect of why this term isn't well thought out. Keep in mind this is solely my opinion, and you're free to make your own judgment call here, but I do intend to bring some amount of knowledge and evidence to the forefront. In order to describe something as a cinematic failure, you first have to understand what is and isn't cinematic, which isn't really easy since the definition of cinematic is just anything relating to or having the qualities of a motion picture, which is literally every movie ever made, so already the term starts to fall apart. By this definition, any movie that has ever been massively distributed automatically can't be a cinematic failure. We've hit a roadblock here. Let's dig a little deeper and find out what the qualities of a motion picture actually are. Unfortunately, this probably won't help us that much either, since even starting with the basics, such as technical aspects, starts to challenge our definition of what is and isn't cinematic. As far as the technical aspects go, most people know what a movie looks like, even if they can't explain it. They know when something looks like it belongs in a movie and when something doesn't. This is most commonly referred to as the film look, and it's characterized by 24 FPS, good highlight roll-off, and a fairly soft image. However, there's a lot of other elements that make up the way that films look, such as good framing and composition that helps tell the story, and good lighting. Because even with the most amazing cinema cameras, shots with garbage lighting and garbage composition still don't look cinematic. There's also the way that films sound. Sound is one of the key elements in making movies feel like movies, so even if your visuals are on point, bad audio can ruin the entire experience. But even with the technical aspects as a baseline, does that really get us any closer to defining what is and isn't cinematic? I mean, what about films that fall outside of these technical specifications, like Dogma 95 films, or films with highly minimalistic visuals? I mean, Dogma 95 was a widely respected cinematic movement that pretty much disregarded all of the filmmaking elements previously mentioned, like lighting, framing, and even high-quality sound in favor of organic and often low-quality sound that was all recorded live. So to call any one of its films a cinematic failure just because it doesn't adhere to the normal standards of what makes films feel cinematic is a bit wrong, don't you think? Let's go even deeper. Maybe what makes a film feel cinematic is less in the presentation and more in the actual contents. A lot of the information that I'm including in this video comes from the Encyclopedia Britannica page on motion pictures, which, if you're somebody who wants to do any kind of work involving film, including film reviews, I'd highly suggest you read in its entirety. And according to that page, 3 of the main characteristics of cinema are intensity, intimacy, and ubiquity. Intensity rests in the film's ability to retain the audience's attention by any means necessary. The intimacy rests in the film's ability to capture what we can't normally see with our eyes, like showing extreme close-ups and revealing details that would otherwise go unnoticed in order to portray a certain feeling. And ubiquity rests in the film's ability to show everything at once. The camera can go places that we can't, and show the story unfolding from multiple perspectives. The film can jump around in time and have multiple storylines going on at once, and we get to witness both of them because the camera is omnipresent. To me, this feels more like what I would describe as cinematic. In fact, I would even argue that you can't really make a movie without at least one of these elements. So now, given these elements, what exactly is a cinematic failure? I'd assume it's something that either doesn't use any of these elements or uses them incorrectly. Something that doesn't capture the audience's attention, doesn't utilize intimate camera work, and doesn't utilize the camera's omnipresent nature. If you're anything like me, then what you're starting to picture in your head is something like this. This is Andy Warhol's 1964 feature film Empire. The entire film consists of 8 hours of nothing but a single shot of the Empire State Building. There's no plot and no characters. The film does nothing to capture the audience's attention, and in fact is not even intended to be watched all the way through. The film has no intimacy in the camera work since it's literally just the Empire State Building as seen from a nearby rooftop, and the camera demonstrates no omnipresence since there's no story for the camera to exist within. This is what I think of when I hear the term cinematic failure. And this isn't to diss the film in any way. I mean, Andy Warhol intended this film to be a cinematic failure. Its whole purpose was to challenge all preconceived notions of cinema, even down to the technical aspects, by choosing to play back the film at 16 FPS rather than 24 FPS. This, however, is not what most people are describing when they use the term cinematic failure. If you go to YouTube and just type in the words cinematic failure, what you'll most often get is reviews of major Hollywood motion pictures like Star Wars, Ralph Breaks the Internet, or Shark Tale. And my question is, why? Now, I get it. None of these films are anything close to what I would describe as high cinema, but cinematic failure? Isn't that a little much? Going back to the examples that I listed earlier, what don't these films have in terms of cinematic elements? Star Wars, Wreck-It Ralph, and Shark Tale all certainly don't strike out on capturing the audience's attention. I mean, the fact that people keep coming back to Star Wars every time there's a new movie out should be proof of that alone. Even the new films never fail to get the audience's attention. I mean, there have never been massive amounts of people walking out of a Star Wars screening due to boredom like what happened with Empire. And the same goes for Ralph Breaks the Internet and Shark Tale, as well as 99% of films released in theaters. When it comes to intimacy, the Star Wars sequels have no shortage of intimate close-ups, breathtaking wide shots, and story-driven cinematography choices. Now, this is the one thing that I'd say that movies like Shark Tale fall flat on simply because there is no camera. The entire film is CGI, so creating intimacy is a bit more difficult since nothing that's shown on screen is really there. But the same principles of cinematography still apply. A close-up is still a close-up, and it exists for the same reason as a close-up in a live-action film. So, is it fair to say that simply because a film is CGI that it lacks the same intimacy as a live-action film? What about ubiquity? I'd argue that all three of these films, as well as 99% of all other Hollywood films, have ubiquity because most films tend to show us the whole story and how every character fits into it. If two characters are separated from each other, it's not like the film has to choose which one it wants to follow. The film will just follow both of them because the camera isn't a character. It can be anywhere the film needs it to be, and most of the time, that's exactly where it is. So if all three of these films contain most of the basic elements of cinema, then where is the failure? Where do these films start to fail on the cinematic level? Sure, I wouldn't exactly describe these films as good, but nothing here says that a film has to be good in order to be considered cinematic. I mean, that would be like saying a song has to be good in order for it to be considered music. If a song is bad, it's not like it failed at being musical, it's just not particularly pleasant music. Not only that, but good is subjective, so there's literally no fair way to include some arbitrary idea of good into the definition of the word cinematic. Perhaps I'm looking at all of this a bit too deeply. Let's just take a moment to focus on the most important aspect of any movie, the story. After all, story is king, so if your story is bad, then no amount of movie magic can make up for that. Only one problem, though. What exactly is a good story? Is it one without plot holes, where all the characters behave in the most logical and rational way? Or is it one where the characters make the most interesting decisions that make the film more entertaining to watch? The thing is that it's all really subjective. I mean, do the new Star Wars movies suck? If you're a diehard Star Wars fan that expected more out of the new trilogy, then yeah, they probably weren't a very good viewing experience for you. But if you're someone younger who might just be experiencing Star Wars for the first time, or if you're like me and you just don't really care about Star Wars that much, then yeah, they're fine. Woo, go Rey. So let's just forget about whether or not the story is good and just focus on whether or not it's cinematic. And this is where things get pretty interesting because for the longest time, the subject of what made a cinematic storyline would often go undiscussed at even the most prestigious of film universities. In most universities, film students are often discouraged from making films about their actual lives because telling what actually happened is not the same as telling a cinematic narrative. And for the most part, this is all that would ever be said about what separates storytelling from cinematic storytelling. That is, until Martin Scorsese released an opinion piece on the New York Times about why he doesn't consider Marvel films to be cinema, where after decades of people writing books about what separates storytelling from cinematic storytelling, Martin Scorsese was able to sum it up in just a few paragraphs. Leave it to a living legend like Martin Scorsese to explain the seemingly unexplainable. In the article, he writes that for him, cinema is about characters and the complexity of people and their contradictory and sometimes paradoxical nature. He then adds that while Marvel movies may contain a lot of the elements that he defines as cinema, the difference is that in Marvel films, the emotional journey of the characters is the build-up to the big action-packed climax, whereas in cinema, the emotional journey of the characters is the entire movie, and the climax isn't as action-packed as it is emotionally heavy. So according to a legendary director that has arguably done more for the world of cinema than any other director currently living, the thing that makes a script cinematic is its insistence on putting character emotions at the forefront. So does this mean that Marvel films and films that are centered around action-packed climaxes are cinematic failures? I don't really believe that it's fair to describe them that way, because even though I agree with Scorsese that these films aren't cinema, they're not really trying to be, and to make it sound like they are trying to be cinema and just not succeeding at it is downright false. Not only that, but I never see any of these movie critics claiming that a movie is a cinematic failure because it doesn't align with Martin Scorsese's definition of cinema. Usually whenever they call a film a cinematic failure, it's usually because they believe the film was bad, whether it be in concept, storytelling, or execution. And while disliking a film is totally fine and everyone is entitled to their own opinion, this is where the overuse of the term cinematic failure comes in. I think that the term is often drastically overused to the point where when most people say cinematic failure, they don't mean a film that has failed to capture the essence of cinema. What they really mean is a film I don't like. And I don't know if you know this, but that's a huge fucking difference between those two statements there. In all actuality, most of these videos would be better off with titles like Why I Don't Like Star Wars The Last Jedi, or Why Shark Tale is a Movie I Don't Like, or Why I Think Ralph Breaks the Internet is Not Good. Literally, the only reason why people even use words like cinematic failure in their video title is because it will entice people to click on the video more by making the uploader of the video seem like he's smart enough to give a detailed breakdown of where and how the film fails at the cinematic level, when in reality, most of these people don't even know what that really means. This is one of the main reasons why I try to avoid titling my reviews in a similar manner, because not only would I never make a claim as bold as this movie is somehow objectively bad based on the extremely subjective definition of the word cinema, but also because I think that creating little puns out of the movie is actually more fun and creative than just saying X movie is a cinematic failure, or X movie fails to capture the essence of cinema, or I have objective proof that X movie is bad that you are not allowed to disagree with. So at the end of the day, what exactly is a cinematic failure? If you ask me, nothing. I mean, it's pretty much just a meaningless term. There's so many different ideas about what is and isn't cinematic that claiming that any film somehow fails at being cinematic is about as stupid as claiming that abstract paintings are artistic failures because paintings are supposed to be realistic, or claiming that ambient music is musical failure because music is supposed to have beats and rhythms. I feel like it can all pretty much be summed up like this. Calling a successful film that made back millions of dollars a cinematic failure just because you didn't like it is literally one of the dumbest things you can do as a film critic.